We don't always feel the turn of a life the moment it happens. Sometimes it comes as paperwork, a quiet courtroom, and a voice you recognize using words you never thought you'd hear aimed at you. Claire Whitman is a forensic financial investigator. Her story matters because the accusation wasn't just about money. It was about taking away her right to be believed. This is where she starts. I remember the sound of the courtroom door more than anything. Not a slam, just a soft latch, like the room was trying to pretend nothing serious was happening. Patricia Monroe was already seated beside me. She slid a yellow legal pad across the table, the kind with the red margin line, and tapped the top corner once. A small cue. Stay steady. Let them talk. Across the aisle, my father sat with his hands folded like he was waiting for a church service to begin. Thomas Whitman looked older than the last time I'd seen him in person, but not softer. Marianne sat close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Her posture was perfect, hair smooth, a neat folder in front of her, aligned with the edge of the table like that meant something. Ethan Brooks stood when the judge entered. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and smiled in a way that belonged on a billboard, not in probate court. All rise. Judge Ellen Hart took her seat and looked down at the file, then up at Ethan, then over to me. She didn't linger. She didn't need to. Ethan started with a voice that tried to sound gentle. Your Honor, this petition is about protection. A family is grieving. My client is trying to prevent further harm. Patricia didn't move. She didn't react. I kept my hands folded the way she told me to, fingers laced, nails pressed into my own skin under the table. Ethan turned slightly toward my father. Mr. Whitman, you're asking the court to appoint a temporary conservator over your late mother's estate. Tell the court why. My father stood. He didn't look at me at first. He looked at the judge, like he was making a reasonable request at the bank. My daughter has struggled with emotional instability since adolescence. He began. She can be impulsive. She isolates. She takes things personally. I'm concerned she's not capable of managing a significant inheritance responsibly. Patricia's pen hovered over the pad but didn't touch it. My father continued, voice steady. I'm requesting the court declare her incompetent for purposes of financial management and appoint my wife as conservator. Marianne is organized. She's calm. She has experience handling accounts. Marianne gave a slow, sad nod, like she hated being the responsible one. I finally looked at my father. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. Judge Hart asked, Mr. Whitman, when was the last time you spoke to your daughter? He didn't hesitate. Not recently. Patricia leaned forward slightly. Define not recently. Ethan lifted a hand as if to smooth the exchange. The relationship has been strained. Patricia's voice stayed even. That wasn't my question. My father swallowed. It's been years. Marianne opened her folder and slid a page to Ethan. He held it up. We also have documentation from her adolescence. He said, counseling records, notes indicating depressive episodes, low self-worth, difficulty regulating emotion. My face stayed still, but my throat tightened. Those were notes from a school counselor after my parents' divorce. Normal pain, filed away like a weapon. Ethan went on. This is a pattern. Patricia's chair creaked softly as she shifted her weight. Your Honor, we object to the characterization. Those records don't establish incapacity. They establish a teenager who was abandoned. My father's jaw flexed. I did not abandon her. Patricia didn't raise her voice. You left her. You built a new household. You stopped showing up. Marianne's mouth tightened for half a second, then relaxed back into that polished sympathy. We watched Claire keep her hands folded, even as the word abandoned landed on the table like something heavy. Judge Hart set her pen down. Mr. Brooks, where is the financial basis for this petition? Ethan blinked. The estate is substantial. Your Honor? Judge Hart's gaze shifted to me, then to Patricia. Counselor Monroe. Do you intend to respond today? Patricia opened her briefcase and placed a slim binder on the table without flourish. Yes. Your Honor. We're ready. My father finally looked at me then. His eyes held the same calm certainty he'd worn all morning, like he believed he'd already won. I didn't give him anything back. Not a glare. Not a shake of the head. Just my silence. If you've been following revenge sins for a while, you know we don't rush the truth. We let it walk in on its own. Patricia slid the binder toward the clerk. Let's start with the bank records. I didn't speak while Patricia passed the binder to the clerk. That part was deliberate. Silence can look like fear if you're used to being loud. It can also look like confidence. The difference depends on who's watching. Judge Hart flipped through the first few pages. Slow and methodical. Bank statements. Account summaries. Tabs neatly labeled. She didn't comment. She just nodded once and set the binder to her left. Across the aisle, Ethan Brooks leaned toward my father and murmured something under his breath. Mary Ann tilted her head, listening, then straightened her spine again. Calm, composed, like this was all an inconvenience. Judge Hart glanced up. Before we proceed, I want to clarify something. Ethan stood again, already smiling. Of course, Your Honor. She looked at him, then at me. Counselor, what is the respondent's occupation? Ethan blinked. He checked his notes, flipped a page. She's an accountant, employed by a regional firm in Milwaukee. I felt Patricia's pen pause against the paper. Judge Hart didn't react right away. She adjusted her glasses, then leaned back slightly in her chair. Is that all? Ethan hesitated. Yes, Your Honor. The room stayed quiet for a beat longer than was comfortable. My father shifted in his seat. Not much. Just enough that I noticed. He still hadn't looked at me again. Patricia rose. Not quickly. Not dramatically. She spoke like this was a correction. Not a reveal. For the record. Your Honor, my client is a certified fraud examiner. She specializes in financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. She has testified as an expert witness in multiple civil and criminal proceedings in this state. Ethan turned toward me, then back to Patricia. That information wasn't. It was included in our discovery disclosures, Patricia replied. Voice even. Filed on time. Tab 4. Judge Hart's eyes flicked back to the binder. She opened it again, flipped to the tab Patricia mentioned, and read. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise. Recognition. She looked up at Ethan. Counselor, did you review these materials? Ethan's ears went red. We reviewed the relevant portions. Judge Hart didn't smile. All portions are relevant. My father finally turned and looked at me. Really looked. His brow furrowed, like he was trying to reconcile the person sitting at the table with the version he'd built in his head over the years. The quiet daughter. The inconvenient reminder. The one who'd been raised by his mother while he moved on. Mary Ann leaned toward him and whispered. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the tension in her jaw when she pulled back. Patricia sat down again. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Judge Hart closed the binder halfway. We'll proceed carefully today. This court takes allegations of incapacity seriously. It also takes misuse of the process seriously. Ethan swallowed. Understood, Your Honor. I rested my hands on the table and stared straight ahead. My pulse was loud in my ears, but my face stayed still. They thought they were teaching me a lesson. They didn't realize I'd been doing this kind of work for years, and they still had no idea how much of themselves they'd already put on the record. The courtroom felt smaller after that. Not louder, just tighter, like the air had been pressed out of it. Judge Hart called for a brief recess. 15 minutes, enough time for coffee, or bathroom breaks, or quiet damage control. Patricia stayed seated, flipping a page on her legal pad. Calm as ever. I didn't move. Neither did my father. Ethan stepped closer to their table and spoke low. Mary Ann listened without nodding this time. When she replied, her voice was barely audible, but her mouth moved fast, efficient, controlled. My father rubbed his thumb along the edge of the table. That was new. He used to do that when he was nervous, back when I was a kid. I noticed it the way you notice an old scar on someone you haven't seen in years. Patricia leaned toward me. You okay to keep going? I gave a small nod. Talking felt unnecessary. When the judge returned, my father stood again. This time, not prompted. Your Honor, he began, hands clasped in front of him. I want to be clear that everything I've done has been out of concern. I stayed when others didn't. I tried to keep my family together. Patricia didn't interrupt. He went on. After the divorce, things were complicated, emotions were high. Claire was difficult, withdrawn. She didn't adjust well. I felt my shoulders tense, just slightly. Difficult. That word had followed me for years. Judge Hart's voice cut in. Mr. Whitman, focus on facts, not characterizations. He nodded quickly. Of course. The fact is, I remained present. I provided support. Patricia spoke without looking at him. You moved 3 states away within 6 months. That was for work. And your daughter a pause, long enough to notice. She chose to stay with my mother. My jaw tightened. Chose. Marianne shifted in her chair. Claire was already settled. It made sense not to disrupt her schooling. Patricia turned toward her. Did you attend any parent-teacher meetings? Marianne hesitated. That was Thomas's responsibility. Patricia glanced back at my father. Did you? Another pause. This one heavier? I trusted my mother to handle those things. Judge Hart scribbled something on her pad. I stared straight ahead, the edge of the table pressing into my palms. Trust. That was the word he used. Trusted her. Like I'd been an errand passed off. Not a child. Patricia continued. Steady. You stopped attending birthdays, holidays, school events. My father's voice sharpened. I sent support, checks. Yes. No calls. I was advised to give her space. Marianne reached for his arm. A gentle touch meant to soften the moment. This isn't about the past. We're here to protect what's left of the family. Judge Hart looked up. Family isn't a legal category. Miss Whitman. The room went quiet again. My father glanced at me. Just once. There was something like confusion in his face. Maybe even irritation. As if he couldn't understand why I was still sitting there, still calm, still not playing the role he'd assigned me all those years ago. I didn't offer him anything. Not then. The person who stayed had also been the one who left me behind. Margaret Whitman never raised her voice. Not once. At least not that I remember. When I slammed a door or talked back, she'd wait until the house settled again, then call my name from the kitchen. Claire, come sit. She always said it the same way. Not sharp, not disappointed, just certain. Her kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner and coffee that had been sitting too long on the warmer. Papers were always spread across the table. Bills stacked by date. Envelopes opened cleanly along the edge. Never torn. She slid a chair out for me. Tell me what happened. Sometimes I did. Sometimes I shrugged. She didn't push. One afternoon, years ago, she tapped a check register with her pen and said, People can say whatever they want. Numbers don't get emotional. I laughed back then. That's depressing. She smiled. Just a little. It's freeing. Margaret added me to one of her checking accounts when I was in my 20s. We sat at the bank together while a woman with a nameplate that said Linda walked us through the paperwork. This is just in case, Margaret explained. If I'm sick or tired or stuck somewhere, the banker looked at me. Joint holder means full access. Margaret nodded. That's the point. At home. She handed me a folder. Inside were copies of the account agreement, her identification, and a handwritten list of every account she owned. If anything ever feels off, she told me. You look. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. Back in the courtroom, Patricia brought Margaret into the conversation without theatrics. No speeches, no emotion in her voice. Mr. Whitman, your mother maintained detailed financial records. My father stiffened. She was organized. She documented every withdrawal. Mary Ann leaned forward. That doesn't mean she understood everything she signed. Patricia turned a page. She wrote about that too. Judge Hart glanced up, wrote where Patricia held up a thin notebook, the cover worn soft at the edges. Her personal journal. My chest tightened. I hadn't expected to see it yet. Patricia opened to a marked page and read aloud. Steady and clear. March. Thomas visited. Asked for help again. I gave him money. I don't feel right about it. Mary Ann shook her head. That's just her anxiety talking. Patricia continued. April. Mary Ann brought papers. I was tired. They said it would make things easier. My father stared straight ahead. Judge Hart leaned forward slightly. Was this journal produced during discovery? Yes, Your Honor. And reviewed by both parties. Patricia's eyes didn't leave the page. It was filed properly. Ethan shifted in his seat. I kept my hands folded. Margaret's handwriting filled my head. Slanted slightly right. Careful. Like she was trying not to take up too much space even on paper. She taught me how to keep records. She never taught me how to be afraid of them. The journal stayed on the table while the clerk organized the next set of exhibits. No one asked for it to be put away. It sat there between us, quiet and heavy, like it had earned its place. Patricia stood again. Your Honor, we'd like to address motive. Ethan straightened in his chair. This is still a guardianship matter. It is, Patricia replied. Calm. Motive matters in guardianship. Judge Hart nodded once. Proceed. Patricia slid another document forward. Margaret Whitman's estate consists of her primary residence, valued at approximately $740,000. In addition, there are retirement and brokerage accounts totaling approximately $510,000, along with certificates of deposit and savings accounts totaling approximately $260,000. The numbers hung in the air longer than I expected. Ethan cleared his throat. The value of the estate isn't in dispute. Patricia looked at him. Then the urgency is... My father leaned forward. That money represents my mother's life. She would have wanted it protected. Patricia's gaze didn't move. Protected from whom? Mary Ann spoke up, her voice smooth. From mismanagement, from impulsive decisions, from someone who has never handled this kind of responsibility. I felt a flicker of heat in my chest, but I kept my hands still. Judge Hart glanced at Mary Ann. You're requesting emergency conservatorship. Yes, Mary Ann said. We believe immediate action is necessary. Accounts should be frozen until the court can evaluate capacity. Patricia nodded. Emergency relief typically requires evidence of imminent harm. Ethan lifted a page. The respondent has full access to the accounts. That's harm. Patricia turned to him. Full access is not misuse. She shifted her attention back to the judge. Your Honor, over the past 3 years, approximately $240,000 was withdrawn from accounts belonging to Margaret Whitman. My father's head snapped up. That's not accurate. Patricia didn't raise her voice. The withdrawals coincide with visits from Mr. Whitman and his wife. Mary Ann's lips pressed together. We were helping her. With what? Patricia asked. Not unkindly. Expenses. Medical needs. Patricia flipped a page. The transfers moved through accounts in 2 different states, Illinois and Minnesota. Ethan frowned. Those were family reimbursements. Patricia tilted her head slightly. Through a business account in your client's name. Judge Hart's pen stopped moving. My father spoke again. Sharper this time. This is being twisted. Patricia met his eyes. Then the records will untwist it. Silence settled over the room. Not dramatic, just heavy. I looked at my father's hands. They were clenched now, knuckles pale. Marianne reached for him again, but he didn't seem to notice. Judge Hart leaned back. "I want the full transaction history entered into the record." Patricia handed the documents to the clerk. Ethan shifted, papers rustling too loudly. They hadn't come to protect me. They hadn't come to protect her. They came because the money was there, and they thought no one would notice how it moved. The deposition happened 2 weeks before the hearing, in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and printer toner. Ethan chose the room. Neutral ground, he'd called it. Patricia didn't argue. I sat at the far end of the table with a plastic cup of water in front of me. Untouched. My father and Marianne joined by video, their faces boxed into the corner of the screen. Marianne adjusted the camera twice before settling. Ethan started the recorder. "This is the deposition of Claire Whitman." Patricia gave a small nod. "Proceed." Ethan leaned back, pen poised. "State your full name." "Claire Elizabeth Whitman." "Current occupation." "Accountant." Patricia didn't look up. That was on purpose. Ethan glanced at his notes. "How long have you held that position? Several years?" Marianne's mouth curved slightly on the screen. "Satisfaction." "Maybe." Ethan continued. "Have you ever been diagnosed with a mental illness?" I took a breath. "No." "Have you ever sought counseling?" "As a teenager." "For what reason?" "Adjustment issues following my parents' divorce." Ethan nodded like that was enough. He didn't ask follow-ups. He didn't ask about certifications or court testimony or professional licenses. He moved on. My father spoke up through the speaker. "That period was difficult." She struggled. Patricia's voice stayed even. "This isn't your deposition." Ethan held up a hand. "It's fine. Family context is relevant." Patricia looked at him. "Then ask better questions." The rest of it went like that. Short answers, no volunteering, no corrections. Ethan filled the silence with assumptions. At one point he leaned forward. "You understand why your father is concerned. I understand his position. And you don't see a problem with managing a large inheritance on your own." "I haven't said that." "What have you said?" "I've answered your questions." Patricia scribbled something on her pad. Afterward, in the hallway, Ethan smiled like the meeting had gone his way. "This doesn't need to get ugly." Patricia adjusted the strap of her bag. "It already is." Back in court, Judge Hart reviewed the deposition transcript without comment. Ethan sat straighter than before, like posture could fix what he'd missed. Patricia spoke. "Your Honor, my client cooperated fully. No objections, no refusals." Judge Hart looked at Ethan. "I see that." My father shifted again. Marianne's image flickered on the screen. Judge Hart closed the transcript. "Counselor Brooks. Discovery compliance appears complete." Ethan nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." What he didn't say was that he hadn't read it carefully. What he didn't realize was that silence, when recorded, lasts longer than confidence. The withdrawals didn't show up all at once. That's what made them easy to miss if you weren't looking for patterns. Patricia set the spreadsheet on the table and angled it toward the judge. Clean columns, dates on the left, amounts spelled out in full, notes in the margin. "These are withdrawals from Margaret Whitman's accounts over a 3-year period," she said. "They are not random." Judge Hart leaned in. "Walk me through it." Patricia pointed to the first cluster. Each of these occurred within days of a visit from Mr. Whitman or his wife. My father shook his head. "We were helping her." She asked. Patricia didn't argue that yet. She moved down the page. "The total withdrawn across all accounts is approximately $240,000. Marianne's voice cut in. "Tight. Over 3 years. That's not excessive." Patricia glanced at her. "It is when the funds move through accounts that don't belong to the account holder." Ethan leaned forward. "They were reimbursements." Patricia tapped another line. "Through a limited liability company registered in Illinois." Ethan frowned. "That company handled family expenses." Judge Hart looked up. "Why would family expenses move through a business account?" Marianne adjusted in her chair. "It was simpler." Patricia let that sit. Then she reached for the next document. Now let's look at authority. She placed a copy of the power of attorney on the table. The paper looked ordinary. That was the point. On its face, this document appears valid. Patricia said, dates align, signatures align. My father exhaled, relief flickering across his face. Patricia continued, however, my client examined the notary information. Judge Hart's pen paused. Go on. Patricia turned slightly toward me. Claire. I stood. My legs felt steady. That surprised me. The notary serial number is registered to a commission that was reported inactive prior to the date of notarization. I said. The commission holder was deceased at the time the document was executed. Ethan's chair scraped softly against the floor. Marianne spoke quickly. That's impossible. I kept my voice level. The database confirms it. Judge Hart looked at Ethan. Did you verify this? Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. We relied on the document as produced, Patricia added, which was produced by your clients. Silence again. The uncomfortable kind. My father's voice came out rougher than before. You're saying my mother didn't know what she signed? I met his eyes. I'm saying she documented her confusion afterward. Patricia slid the journal closer. Margaret wrote about good days and bad days, about pressure, about being tired. Marianne shook her head. That doesn't mean incapacity, Patricia nodded. It means vulnerability, which creates fiduciary duty. Judge Hart leaned back. And you're alleging that duty was violated. Yes, Patricia said, repeatedly. I sat down. My hands were cold now. I pressed them together under the table. The numbers didn't accuse anyone. They didn't need to. They just sat there, lined up, doing what they always do when you let them speak long enough. The room felt different after that. Not tense exactly. More exposed. Like everyone had realized this wasn't going where they thought it was. Judge Hart took a moment before speaking. She adjusted her glasses, glanced once more at the power of attorney, then looked at my father. Mr. Whitman, she said. Measured. I want to hear from you directly. He stood slowly. The confidence he'd walked in with had thinned, stretched too far. I never intended to hurt anyone. My mother was stubborn. She didn't always listen. Marianne and I were trying to help. Marianne nodded along. We were the ones checking on her, making sure bills were paid. Patricia leaned forward. You withdrew funds through accounts not belonging to Margaret Whitman. My father's jaw tightened. We reimbursed ourselves. For what? For time. For travel. For managing things she couldn't. Judge Hart held up a hand. This isn't an argument. It's testimony. My father took a breath. Claire has always been difficult. She holds grudges. She reads too much into things. That word again. Difficult. Patricia didn't interrupt this time. She let him continue. She stopped calling. She shut us out. When my mother died, Claire moved fast. Too fast. That concerned me. Judge Hart's eyes narrowed slightly. Concern does not grant authority. Marianne spoke up, her voice sharper than before. We were trying to keep this out of court. Patricia responded evenly. You filed for emergency conservatorship. Marianne looked away. Judge Hart turned to me. Miss Whitman, do you wish to respond? I stood. The chair scraped softly behind me. I didn't move fast. I said, I followed my grandmother's instructions. She told me where everything was. She told me what to look for. My father shook his head. She was confused. I kept my voice steady. She was careful. Patricia slid the journal forward again. Your Honor, I'd like to read one final entry. Judge Hart nodded. Patricia read, If my son ever stands in court and speaks against my granddaughter, that will be the proof I was right to leave him nothing. My father stared at the table. Marianne reached for his arm. This time, he pulled away. Judge Hart closed the journal gently. I've heard enough. She spoke slowly. Clearly, the petition for emergency conservatorship is denied. With prejudice. Ethan's shoulders sagged. Judge Hart continued, "Based on the evidence presented, this court will refer the matter to the district attorney's office and the appropriate federal authorities for further review." The words landed without drama. No raised voice. No gavel strike. Just consequences. I sat back down. My hands were shaking now, but it didn't matter. The room had already shifted. The house in Oakwood sounded different without her. Not emptier, just quieter, like it was finally resting. I spent the first weekend after the hearing there alone. No boxes, no plans, just coffee in the same chipped mug she used every morning, sitting at the kitchen table where she used to spread out envelopes and statements. The court paperwork was stacked neatly in my bag by the door. I hadn't opened it yet. I didn't need to. Patricia had already called. "It's done," she'd said. "The referral is official. Criminal proceedings will take time. You don't need to be involved unless they ask." I thanked her. My voice sounded normal. That surprised me. My father didn't call. Marianne didn't either. I heard later, through someone else, that accounts were frozen and questions were being asked. That part felt distant, like news about strangers. What stayed close were small things. Her handwriting on the grocery list still on the fridge, a receipt tucked into a cookbook, the way she'd written dates in the corner of every envelope. Always spelled out, never shortened. I sat at the table and opened her journal again, not to prove anything, just to hear her voice one more time. "You were right to be careful," I said out loud, then laughed softly at myself. Talking to an empty room felt less strange than I expected. That night, I slept in her room, same quilt, same lamp. I woke up early without an alarm, the way she always did. In the morning, I called my office and told them I was ready to come back. Work felt like something solid, familiar, mine. Before I left, I placed the journal back in the drawer where she'd kept it. Not hidden, just safe. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. For a long time, I'd carried the idea that being quiet meant being weak, that not reacting meant losing, that speaking last meant being unheard. What I learned is simpler than that. My name is Claire Whitman. I was raised by a woman who kept records because she believed the truth deserved somewhere to live. Standing up for myself didn't change who my father was. It changed how I see myself moving forward. And that's enough. We've shared this story quietly, the way it unfolded. If it stayed with you, you'll find more waiting right here.